The history of IQ is absolutely flooded with eugenics and racism, and it sucks at what it's supposed to do, and I hate it. The first attempt to measure intelligence was put forward by eugenicist Francis Galton. He was literally the guy who came up with the term eugenics. Then in 1904, intelligence tests took a single brief turn for the good when French psychologist Alfred Binet developed the Binet-Simon test with his colleague Theodore Simon. He was asked by the French government to figure out a way to identify kids who were falling behind developmentally and needed extra help. And he actually had some thoughts on intelligence that I can get behind. First, he believed that intelligence was not static. His purpose was to identify children that needed extra help and get them the help that they needed to succeed. He also believed that intelligence was way too complicated a concept to be boiled down and quantified with a single number. He believed that it changed over time and can only be compared in children with similar backgrounds. But then IQ went right back into the hands of eugenicists. American psychologist Lewis Terman adapted the Binet-Simons test into a test called the Stanford-Binet Intelligence Scales. It was the first test to arrive at a single number and call it an Intelligence Quotient. Soonly, during World War I, IQ tests were being used by the United States military on new recruits to determine placement in officer training. Those tests were administered to over 1.7 million soldiers. They were extremely culturally biased and bolstered inaccurate racist generalizations about entire groups of people. Then in 1924, the state of Virginia enacted a policy that allowed for the forced sterilization of people with low IQ scores, calling them feeble-minded. The Supreme Court upheld that law in the 1927 decision Buck v. Bell, and by 1956, 24 states had laws that allowed for the involuntary sterilization of people. And that led to the forced sterilization of over 59,000 people. So yeah, the history of eugenics is a real big problem I got with IQ. Secondly, IQ isn't the same thing as intelligence, and there's no single agreed-upon definition for intelligence in the first place. IQ generally only tests for abstract, linguistic, and logical mathematical reasoning. And that basically means that they're only valid at predicting academic performance, and that's about it. Now people are currently flooding into the comments saying, IQ is a good predictor of success, as if socioeconomic background has nothing to do with academic performance, and that those two things have nothing to do with success. And I really hate the idea that success directly translates to how much money you make, but I digress. Even if you only consider what the test actually tests for, a huge factor is motivation to do well on the test itself. This study reviewed 46 previous studies and found that when people are offered incentives like money, IQ test scores are significantly improved, like by about 2/3 of a standard deviation, or about 10 IQ points, and 15 points for people who initially scored under 100. Also, IQ tests are inherently culturally biased. Group differences are best explained by access to quality education and exposure to shit that's actually on IQ tests. For example, a brief training session on Raven's progressive matrices, which is often considered a pure test of general intelligence, improved the scores of black South Africans by 14 points. But it only improved the scores of white South Africans by 4 points. Lastly, I really just don't see any everyday utility to IQ. You got a high IQ score? So what? Don't mean you're any better than somebody with a low IQ score. You got a low IQ score? So what? Don't make you any worse than somebody with a high IQ score. The best thing about IQ is if I hear somebody bragging about theirs, I know I don't fuck with them. Really, I just don't think it's ever really helpful to see people as too smart or too dumb for anything. Intelligence is some complicated shit, and it's way too easy to be reductive about it. Thanks for watching. Me and my community here are working to raise funds to help save Amir and his family. And we're getting super close to meeting their goal considering how far we've come, and I really appreciate y'all for helping.